Greetings, everyone. This is an exciting video because we're starting a brand new order, Carnivora. Don't be scrambling to write any of this down. Just have a quick look here. Remember all the way back to our video about orders and families. I gave you every single order, and then I gave you a list of all of the families that we were going to cover in this class, and maybe a few examples of who's in each one. Let's start with Canidae, also known as the dog family. And if you want to just take a quick look here before I flip this, this is the order that we're going to cover everything in this group Carnivora. As always, I'm asking you, what did Elbrock say? The little textbook chapter that you had there. I found this one particularly interesting. What did you find that you thought was interesting? I also want to tell you that at the beginning of my time with you this semester, I told you I would be honest every time I showed you a photograph that was from captivity. So this is a wolf. This is my photo, but it's in captivity. More about that as we continue on. This one is not in captivity. The vast majority of my photos are from captive wolves, but here's a group of wild ones from Yellowstone National Park. And I did ask you to read the blog. There's only 2 entries. One of them is the track and trail of this pack of wolves. Now, my very first wolf sighting in Yellowstone was this guy right here. And if you're confused, we're looking at the animal in the middle of the photo in the grass there. And it's pre-dawn, so it's dark light. The animal's far away. It's running. But I had a van full of students with me. This was only a year or 2 after they had reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone. Myself and another professor took a group of students on a travel ecology course to the western states, and the highlight for me was being in Yellowstone. How exciting this was to see a wild wolf. I had seen them in Alaska before, but that had been years earlier, and to share this with a van full of students was just even more amazing. Now, I know this picture is equally not impressive, but what it does show is 2 things. First, if you're to encounter an animal, sometimes you're not always able to get a crisp magazine quality photo of it. That's fine. Second, this picture really shows clearly the size of a wolf. Now, a road is the size of a road everywhere, right? This is a standard lane arrangement, and you can see how big this wolf is. Wolves are just massive. A typical wolf will weigh over 100 pounds. Now, that's not true of every subspecies of wolf, but we're really looking at an animal that routinely tops 100 pounds. There are male wolves that can get to be about 140 pounds, so 100 isn't even at the top end of the scale there. Okay, back to captivity. So there was this place up in Canada that catered to wildlife photographers, and you would pay a fee and go into these pens with the animals. The animals had all been hand raised. He had permits for what he did. He treated his animals well. He had a zoo license. All this was a legal enterprise in Canada. And if you're telling me that you're not interested in seeing captive animals, or you don't think animals like this should be in captivity, then you and I don't have a problem. I can certainly see that side of it. For me, the standard was, were the animals cared for, and were the animals legally acquired? And in some cases, he had a few rescue animals, but most of them he had bought from breeders. So what makes a wolf a wolf? A couple things. We're going to get into those, but from this photograph right here, I would say I would be hard-pressed to prove that this is a wolf just from this picture here. There's a little bit of debate on where wolves came from, and I think they've now settled on it not exactly being a domestic. Oh, I said that backwards, didn't I? Let me repeat. There's a little bit of debate on where dogs came from, and I think it's settled that dogs are not exactly domestic wolves, but that dogs are domesticated from an ancestor that they and wolves both share. And that may change again when they know a little bit more about genetics. But if you look at this guy and you look at this guy, you can see some similarities, but the differences are just glaring. This is a boxer. His name was Jazz. This is my brother's dog. And if it looks different than a regular boxer to you, it's because he never trimmed the ears. So docking the ears or clipping the ears is what gets them to stand up straight. So he still has that boxer face, that shortened snout. He still has that color pattern that's typical of a boxer. And most of what we've done to make dogs look different than their wolfish ancestor is genetics, right? We breed them selectively for what we want. That's how you end up with something like a collie or a poodle. But then when we still don't get what we want, we shave funny patterns into them, or we clip their tails like they do on Dobermans, or you dock the ears. I bring up that dog ancestry because in your portfolio assignment, you have the ability to do an entry on both domestic dog and on dog tracks. In fact, you can do that with cats as well. And the reason for that is if you live with a dog, you probably know a lot about animal behavior that's useful to you that can be applied to wild animals as well. I also want to talk about the teeth here. So we are in the order Carnivora, and we do have a carnivore tooth pattern in this Carnivora, the wolf. And you can see what I called stabbers in the front, right? Those canine teeth. And then what I would call slicers in the back here. So these are a combination of molars and premolars that are very high and very pointed for slicing. And they match up with a tooth on the top. So here's that lower tooth, and here's the upper tooth that goes with it. Together, this pair of shearing teeth are called carnassial teeth. This is something that I'm asking you to write in your notes. You should have your note template either open in another window or print it out and next to you there. The carnassial pair are found in carnivora that are meat eaters, and they're a set of shearing teeth. This is meant to take big pieces of meat and turning them into smaller pieces of meat. Now, most of the meat eaters don't have grinding teeth in the back, so meat eaters are not known for their chewing. You may have a dog at home and you're like, true, that dog's disgusting. Well, there's an expression that we have. When you take big bites of food and you hardly chew them and you swallow them fast, that's called wolfing down your food. And there's no wolf mother that ever told her kids to slow down and chew better. It's all about getting as much food into your belly as you possibly can, and then the stomach acids will do the rest. Plant material is the stuff that has to be ground up, has to be chewed, not meat. Here's a picture that I took in the back room of some skulls in our collection here. This first one is a wolf, and sometimes people note the red tooth there. It's just taped with red tape. I had to glue it back together. Here's a coyote. Here's a red fox, and then the smallest one is a gray fox. These are the 4 canines that we're going to cover in class here. And you can see that there's a lot of similarities to them, especially the wolf and the coyote, but there's some differences as well. This is a picture of the 4 jaws of those same animals, wolf, coyote, red fox, gray fox. And I no longer remember why I added a cat jaw to the end here, but since it's here, let's just look how it's got a different number of teeth in the jaw. And here you can see in this one, there's that carnassial tooth, the carnassial. That goes for all of these guys. It's all the same shape jaw, it's just different sizes. All right, we'll spend a good amount of our time here talking about how to tell a wolf from a coyote in the field. So which do you think this is, wolf or coyote? If you said coyote, you're correct. And if it was just a lucky guess, let's make sure that we understand how to tell them apart. This is an internet picture rather than one of my own. Let's go back into captivity and we'll have a look at these pictures. These wolves were just gorgeous. We got to go inside. They had a pen that was about 2 acres in size. He had 7 females. And how he would get them to pose for us like this is by tossing little pieces of hot dogs to them. So although this picture looks really cool, and I love how wild this animal looks, how intense her gaze is, it's kind of ruined for me because standing next to me is a 72-year-old man with a piece of hot dog going to try to get this wolf's attention. Here are the characteristics that I want you to focus in on. First, Wolves have a very broad snout and very wide cheekbones. So I'm going to combine those two together, that facial feature pair, we're going to put those together. And you can't see the broad snout necessarily in this picture because this wolf is face on, but you can see the broad face that it has. You really get a diamond shape to a wolf's head, and I've never gotten this from a coyote. Coyotes just do not have the broad cheekbones. Now, if we go back to what this is for, do you remember us talking about this in the in-class video where this space behind the cheekbone is all where jaw muscle goes? So I'm not saying that there's not a big space here. It's just not super large like it is in the wolves. Wolves have a much broader muzzle. Coyotes have a more delicate muzzle. Coyotes have a much bigger muscle. Coyotes have a smaller one. And both of those things go together. Are you ready? It's all about this. Wolves are built to kill things bigger than themselves. Coyotes are built to kill things smaller than themselves. Did I just say wolves only kill things bigger than themselves? No, that's not true at all. But they're built for killing things bigger than themselves. Did I just say coyotes will never kill things bigger than themselves? No, I didn't say that. But they're built to kill things smaller. Cool. The other thing that you can see here in this is the big broad body that they have. I told you wolves are big and chunky and beefy. So you get that big broad sense there. That's helpful. The other characteristics I have to use a different picture to show you, but while we're here, I want to just point out a couple characteristics in the coat. Can you see this right here? It looks like half of a smiley face. Can you imagine it's a full smiley face if we looked at the other side of the body? That's a coat characteristic that's found on several canids, and it's actually called the saddle, which makes sense because if you were going to saddle up this guy, this is about where the ass end of the saddle would go. The other characteristic that I want you to see is here on the tail. That black circle on the tail, that black spot, there's a tail gland, excuse me, right underneath that spot. So many other canines have these two characteristics. You cannot use them to tell that this is a wolf, but they're cool to note. Here is the same wolf we were just looking at. Here's a better view of that tail spot, and you can see the saddle one more time here. But what I want to tell you, the third characteristic, so the first is the broad muzzle and the wide cheekbones. The second is the big, boxy, blocky, strong, muscular-looking body. And then the third is the long legs and big feet. So going along with the wolf needing to kill prey bigger than itself is their need to track that animal down. So wolves have long legs and big feet because they're distance runners. Wolves want to be on the cross-country team. Coyotes have a much smaller foot and a more slender leg. So up here is a wolf track that I found when I was in Idaho. This is a fresh wolf track. He woke us up in the middle of the night. It was a pair actually, and walked in front of our camera trap. They killed an elk. It's a cool long story. Do you remember some of the characteristics we talked about when we talked about tracks at the beginning of my time? So here's a toe. Here's the other three. Remember the negative space in the middle? You can see what looks like a starfish, a little Patrick action going on here, and then the metacarpal pad behind it. Look how symmetrical a canine track is. It's sort of like a butterfly. Like you can fold this in half. It's not perfectly symmetrical, but it's very, very close to it. Now I want to tell you that wolf tracks have more in common with dog tracks because dogs and wolves have that same ancestor. So your dog is a long-legged, big-footed animal. People get confused by this because they see their dog track. Your dog maybe weighs, I don't know, 40 pounds, let's say, and leaves this big track. And then you go out in the woods and you see a 40-pound coyote track, and it looks tiny to you because it's much smaller than what your dog left. So people get that a little bit wrong. The foot has to be compared to the species that it is. I would say another way to help determine that this is a wolf instead of a dog is I want to look at the nail here and then the back of the toe. And I'm going to do that on the other one. Here's the nail and here's the back of the toe. Look how straight they are. Dog tracks tend to be more splayed out. Dog toes don't tend to be so nice and tight. They sprawl and go in different directions. Hey, that's a picture of me. Obviously, then I didn't take this photo. I'm at a wolf den, an abandoned wolf den that was also in Idaho. And then we did talk about scat before. This is our first carnivora, right? But not our first carnivore. And we talked about how carnivores create cylinders. And here are typical looking cylinders from a carnivore. You can see them all hidden in the grass here. And here is, remember I talked about when they first kill, they'll eat the internal organs and they'll drink the blood. So this is what's called a blood scat from a wolf. But this is what's typically found in the environment. And this wolf scat is full of elk hair. And I did want to point something out to you. This scat up here, that will be gone in a couple of days, just completely washed away. This scat over here may exist in the landscape for months. When they have that packed tight hair in their scat, that scat resists being broken apart by rain and weather. So you get this a little bit of a biased look at what wolves are eating, because when they eat a lot of hair, that scat stays in the environment. And if they had something smaller that they ate, let's say a rabbit, the hair wouldn't be packed in as tight because there wouldn't be as much of it, and that scat would get lost. We should think about that with coyotes as well. Coyotes are actually true omnivores. And so when they eat apples, the apple scats disappear pretty quickly. But when they eat a deer, that hairy scat stays there for a long time and biases your perception of how important deer are to their diet. The other thing that I want to point out here, and in your notes, it says, what does it mean when there's a lot of hair in a scat? The wolf obviously is not digesting the hair, right? If it's recognizable on the other end, it is not digested. So why would a wolf be eating hair? The answer is they're at the end of the carcass. They're maybe gnawing on the hide. They're chewing on the legs. They're not purposely ingesting hair. All of this hair is because it's the last bit of meat that's tucked tight to the bone, and they have to end up eating some of the hair because they're gnawing through the hide to get at it. So when they're able to eat lots and lots of flesh, there's very little hair in their scat. So this scat on the right indicates the first meal of the elk, and this one on the left is probably one of the last meals they're eating of the elk. Hey, I've been very careful so far to just call this animal a wolf, but since there's several species of wolf on the planet, we should make a decision. Should we be calling them gray wolves or should we be calling them timber wolves? And the answer is yes. You can call them either. This is another species that has more than one common name. So on the test, if you call it a gray wolf, you're correct. If you call it a timber wolf, you're also correct. I did want to just point out the long legs and big feet of these wolves right here. Again, we're in captivity here. Which name do I prefer? Well, I've told you a couple times I do not like calling animals by color. So here is a picture I took in captivity of a gray wolf. Yes, I recognize that this animal is not gray. Remember, we looked at squirrels like this. This is just a melanistic wolf, same species. And likewise, here's one I took off the internet. This is also not a gray wolf. It's a gray wolf species, but the wolf itself is white. The gray wolves that live in the Arctic are white because that's an advantage for them. The ones that were gray didn't do as well. So this is a leucistic wolf. And this is also the problem with calling them timber wolves. There ain't a tree in this whole picture here. This guy's living in the Arctic where there are no trees. So gray wolf doesn't work every single time. Timber wolf doesn't work every single time. You pick your poison, I guess. Couple things about this picture. First, I would like to show you that there's the broad muzzle. Here's the big, boxy, muscular-looking body, long legs, and big feet. Second, you can see the fence here. We always try to be careful not to show the picture of the fence, but I did want to show you, this is James, one of my former students. I did want to show you a picture of how close we were able to get to these things. It really was an amazing experience, I must say. This wolf looks gigantic, though. This looks like you could ride it into battle. And it's because of a thing called forced perspective. I'd like to show you how far back James is in this picture. He is standing well behind the wolf. The wolf is so much closer to me that it makes the wolf look bigger. And if you don't pay attention to that, hell, if you drew a straight line like this, right, you might confuse yourself and think that these guys are the same distance. If James were standing here, or squatting here, I should say, you would get a much more accurate picture of how big this wolf was in comparison. I sometimes do programs for elementary school kids, and I've used this picture a lot. I was again in captivity, and I just set up my tripod and wanted to get a couple pictures of this wolf, and the wolf did this behavior. So I'll show this to kids, especially little kids, and I'll usually get a reaction. And I'll ask them to tell me in one word, describe this photo. And a lot of times little kids will say growl or roar or danger. And one time a kid yelled out, he's going to eat me. And he said it pretty fast, so it sort of counts as one word. Hashtag he's going to eat me. But often I will get somebody in the crowd that has a dog at home and will give me the correct caption for this. And that's yawn. So I told you I had my tripod set up. I was able to capture a whole series of these pictures where the wolf is literally just yawning. And it's very difficult. Excuse me. It's very difficult for me to even look at a picture of an animal yawning without yawning myself. Well, this one he looks so much more friendly, right? This doesn't look quite as vicious as this one. Hey, have you noticed the melanistic wolf in the background yet? Pretty good camouflage, I'd say. So my concern here is that somebody could take a picture like this and maybe use it. Imagine that this is a magazine cover, right? So up here would be where the title of the magazine would go, maybe like Cattle Rancher Monthly, right? And then over here is where they would write the names of the different articles that they would have, and maybe they would use this picture, and the lead article would be wolves are going to eat your children, or Eastern liberals want to put this cattle killer in your state, that sort of thing. When in fact the reality is this wolf was actually just yawning, and half a second earlier it looked nice and adorable like this. So do we have wolves in New York State, yes or no? I would stake my reputation on saying no, but I would only do that if you let me say however afterwards. So New York is a pretty big state, and there's nobody protecting the borders every square inch to know what animals are coming in and not. What I can say is this. There is no evidence that there's a population of wolves in New York State. Despite what you may have heard, despite what you can find on the internet, there's no documentation from anybody that there's wolves in New York State in any numbers. Back in 1999, a guy shot a wolf, maybe it was 98. A guy shot a wolf in the Adirondacks thinking that he was shooting a coyote, and that was genetically tested and shown to be a wolf. The thing about wolves is they would be super hard to hide, not because of their size, but because of their voice. Wolves howl, and they make a completely different noise than coyotes do. So if we had wolves, let's say in the Adirondacks, it would be very simple to document them. You wouldn't even have to lay eyes on them. So I call BS on this whole thing that there's wolves in New York. And what we could do is spend a great deal of time talking about what a coy wolf would be, because our coyotes do have wolf genetics in their ancestry. So having a full-blooded wolf in New York State in the wild is an incredible rarity. But having coyotes that have some wolf DNA, or even having domestic dogs with some wolf DNA, well, that's much more common. Hey, that's everything I wanted to tell you guys about wolves. Have a look at your sheet, make sure everything's filled in. If you have any questions, let me know. And our next video will be about this guy, the coyote.